The last keeper of Anvil Rock Light vanished in 1983. They found his quarters empty, his belongings untouched. A cassette recorder on the desk, still running. The tape long finished, the reels turning in silence. When the Coast Guard played the tape back, all they got was the final minute of recording. His voice was barely recognizable. Ragged, broken. The sound of a man who hadn't slept in days, maybe weeks.
I turned the light off. It follows the beam. Every pass it gets closer. It knows where I am. I can hear it moving when the light touches the water. God, it sees me. It sees me.
No one has set foot on that island in over 40 years, until the commission sent me. I didn't know any of this when I took the job. That's the part that makes me sick. The recording, the crew that refused to go back, the warnings buried in the archives. None of it was in my briefing. I didn't hear Howard Bellamy's voice until I was already on the island, already alone, already 40 minutes from the nearest human being, on a slab of granite in the North Atlantic with night coming on. By the time I understood what he'd been trying to tell whoever came next, it was far too late to leave. My name is Garrett Hale. I've been a lighthouse technician for the Maritime Heritage Preservation Commission for 9 years. It sounds more romantic than it is. Mostly I drive to coastal sites, replace corroded wiring, patch roofing, file reports nobody reads. Lighthouses in the US are relics, most of them automated in the 70s, decommissioned by the 90s, handed off to historical societies and small-town preservation boards that don't have the budget to maintain them properly. I'm one of 4 technicians covering the entire northeastern seaboard. My territory runs from Bar Harbor, Maine to Montauk Point, Long Island. I've serviced every lighthouse on that stretch at least twice, except Anvil Rock. Anvil Rock Light sits on a granite island 2 miles off the coast of Maine, roughly between Jonesport and Beals Island. The island is small, maybe 3 acres of bare rock, no trees, no vegetation beyond lichen and seagrass. The lighthouse is a 40-foot stone tower built in 1891 with an attached keeper's quarters that was never modernized. No electricity from the mainland. The original Fresnel lens, a massive hand-ground glass assembly that focused the light into a beam visible for 20 nautical miles, is still in the lantern room. Or it was, as of the last inspection in 1987. All I was told was that Anvil Rock had been decommissioned in '83 and the commission had received a grant to restore it. Tourism initiative. They wanted it operational by next summer. My supervisor Diane handed me the work order like it was any other job.
Full inspection, structural assessment, lens evaluation. Overnight if necessary.
Nobody's been out there in 40 years, Diane.
Which is why we need an inspection. You'll take the 12-foot skiff from Jonesport. Weather window opens Thursday. I need the report by Monday.
Simple. Routine. That was the word on the work order. Routine maintenance. So, Thursday morning I loaded the skiff with my toolkit, a portable generator, food and water for 2 days, a sleeping bag, a VHF radio, and a handheld spotlight. I launched from Jonesport Harbor at 7 a.m., under a grey sky with a 6-knot wind from the northwest. The sea was calm, long, slow swells that rocked the skiff gently, almost soothingly. I could see Anvil Rock from the harbor, a dark shape on the horizon, the lighthouse tower rising from it like a finger pointing at the sky. The crossing took 35 minutes. As I approached the island, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound. The ocean was everywhere, waves slapping the granite, gulls wheeling overhead. But beneath the natural sounds, there was a quality to the air that felt muffled, dampened, as if the island existed inside a pocket of thicker atmosphere that absorbed noise before it could travel. The engines sounded quieter here, My own breathing sounded closer, more contained, as if the space around me had contracted. I tied up at the old iron mooring ring on the south side, where a set of stone steps had been cut into the granite. The steps were slick with spray and spotted with barnacles. I hauled my gear up to the narrow shelf of flat rock at the base of the lighthouse. The keeper's quarters was a low stone building attached to the west side of the tower, with a heavy wooden door that took 3 solid shoves to open. The hinges screamed. Inside, a single room with a cot, a desk, a cast iron stove, and a wooden chair. Everything coated in a thick layer of salt crust and grime. The ceiling was stained with water damage. The floor was stone, cracked in several places, with dark streaks that might have been mold or might have been something else. On the desk, next to a dead kerosene lamp, I noticed a cassette recorder. Old, heavy, a Sony TC-150, the kind journalists used in the 70s. Beside it, stacked in 3 neat rows, were cassette tapes, dozens of them, each one labeled in small, precise handwriting with a date. They started at 1971, January, and continued through 1983, November. 12 years of tapes. 12 years of a man recording his thoughts alone on a rock in the Atlantic. I didn't play them yet. I had work to do. The inspection came first. The tapes could wait. I wish I'd listened before I climbed the tower. The lighthouse interior was a single spiral staircase, iron steps bolted to the stone wall, winding upward through the 40-foot column to the lantern room at the top. I tested each step before committing my weight. The iron was corroded but sound. The bolts held. I climbed slowly, my flashlight beam bouncing off the curved walls. Halfway up, I found the first message. It was scratched into the stone wall at about chest height, deep enough that 40 years of salt and moisture hadn't eroded it. Block letters, rough, carved with something sharp, a knife maybe, or the edge of a screwdriver. Not the careful penmanship of routine documentation. This was a man carving words into stone because he needed them to outlast him. To outlast everything. I stared at it. The light brings it up. The dark lets it move. My flashlight beam made the carved letters look like cracks in the stone, shadows filling each groove. I ran my fingers over the words. They were deep. Whoever carved them had pressed hard, spent time, meant every letter. Not graffiti, not a joke. A warning, chiseled into the wall of a lighthouse by a man who wanted someone to find it. Someone who didn't trust tape or paper or anything that could degrade. Stone lasts. He chose stone. But a warning about what? I kept climbing. The stone was damp. In several places, a dark, wet substance had seeped through the mortar joints. Not water, something thicker. It left a residue on my fingers that felt organic, slick, with a faint briny smell that was similar to seawater, but sweeter, more alive. I found the second message 10 steps higher. Same carved letters, same urgency. Don't turn it on at night. It feeds on the beam. Every photon makes it bigger. The words landed differently now. The first message was abstract, cryptic, easy to dismiss. This one was specific. The light, the beam, something feeding. I looked up the stairwell at the remaining steps, winding into darkness, and felt the first real pulse of unease. Not fear, not yet. Just the awareness that someone had spent considerable effort carving warnings into the walls of a staircase that led to a light nobody was supposed to turn on again. I kept climbing. I wanted to see the lens. The lantern room was a glass-walled enclosure at the top of the tower, 8 feet in diameter, surrounded by thick panes set in iron frames. The Fresnel lens dominated the space, a 5-foot-tall assembly of hand-ground glass prisms arranged in concentric rings, designed to capture every photon from the lamp at its center and focus them into a single, devastating beam of light. First-order Fresnel, the largest type ever made. Each prism was beveled with mathematical precision, the glass so pure it seemed to glow even without a light source. Even after 40 years of salt and weather, the lens was immaculate. Not a single crack, not a single clouded pane. As if it had been maintained, as if someone, or something, had been polishing it all this time. I ran my hand along the brass frame. The metal was warm, not sun-warm. There was no direct sunlight. The sky was overcast. Warm the way living things are warm. The way a surface is warm when something has been pressing against it recently. There was a third message, not carved in stone this time, scratched directly into the brass frame of the lens housing in smaller, more frantic letters. I had to crouch and angle my flashlight to read it. 1983, October 30th. Dome is 400 feet across now. Ridges, channels, openings. It breathes. I can see it breathe. The beam shows everything. I don't want to see any more. A dome, 400 feet across, breathing. I stood up and looked out through the lantern room glass at the ocean. Grey, flat, featureless. Swells rolling in from the northwest, the surface unbroken from the island to the horizon. Nothing there, just water. But Bellamy, the man who'd carved this, who'd recorded himself for 12 years, who'd scratched his desperation into metal because he was running out of surfaces, had seen something through this very glass. Something the beam illuminated. Something so large it had taken his breath. I made my notes for the report. Structural, sound. Lens, intact, exceptional condition. Lamp mechanism, will require new burner assembly and fuel line. I took photos with my phone. In every photo, the lens appeared to have a faint luminescence, a blue-white glow at the edges of the prisms that I told myself was a camera artifact. I climbed back down and spent the afternoon surveying the exterior. The tower masonry was in remarkable shape for its age. The keeper's quarters needed a new roof and door, but was otherwise salvageable. The mooring infrastructure was solid, professional work, thorough. By 4 p.m., I was satisfied that the inspection was essentially complete. I should have gotten back in the skiff. But the work order required testing the light mechanism. The grant application specifically needed confirmation that the Fresnel lens could be made operational. A simple test. 15 minutes. I'd do it at dusk and spend the night in the keeper's quarters. Before hauling the generator upstairs, I sat at Bellamy's desk and picked up the first tape. I'd brought a portable Bluetooth speaker with a headphone jack. The Sony recorder was dead. Corroded batteries, seized mechanism. But I had a battery-powered Walkman in my truck at home that I use on job sites. Stupid. I didn't have it with me. But the Sony, after I cleaned the contacts and borrowed 2 AAs from my flashlight, coughed to life. The playback was muffled, the tape warped by decades of salt air, but audible. Barely. I pressed play on 1971, January. Howard Bellamy's voice filled the keeper's quarters. It was a good voice. Low, steady. The kind of voice that belongs to a man who thinks before he speaks. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with the care of someone who knows nobody will hear them, but who records them anyway. Because the recording is the point, the discipline of observation, the act of witnessing.
January 14th, 1971. First week on the rock. Weather's been clear. Wind from the southwest, 12 knots. The lens is in excellent condition, better than any I've serviced on the mainland. Whoever built this one was an artist, not an engineer. The glass is so clean it almost isn't there. I've been cleaning it anyway. Gives me something to do with my hands. January 22nd. Supply boat came and went. Brought canned goods, kerosene, batteries, a box of books. The supply officer asked how I was holding up. Told him fine. He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am. But the silence out here is the cleanest thing I've ever heard. No static, no noise, just the ocean and the wind and the light going around and around. I could get used to this.
I fast-forwarded through the early tapes. Years of quiet documentation, weather, maintenance, bird sightings, the occasional dry joke delivered to an empty room. Bellamy talked to the recorder the way some people talk to a pet, not expecting an answer, just needing to hear a voice, even his own. There was warmth in the recordings, humor, a man building a life out of solitude and routine, and the slow, rhythmic sweep of a beam of light.
December 25th, 1974. Christmas Day. Supply boat isn't due for 3 more days, so it's just me and the lens. I've been talking to her. I've started calling the lens her, God knows why, about whether there's a God. She's non-committal. Made a small cake from powdered mix the supply officer snuck into the last delivery. Not bad. I sang Silent Night to the ocean. The ocean didn't seem impressed. June 9th, 1976. Fog for 11 straight days now. I can't see the water, can't see the mainland, can't see 20 feet past the railing. The light goes out into the fog and comes back as a glow, like the fog is swallowing it and giving it back in a different shape. I go with it. Out, back, getting used to the rhythm. Starting to think the rhythm is the point.
I listened to these tapes and felt the weight of a decade alone. Bellamy wasn't crazy. He was thoughtful, precise. The kind of man who watched the world carefully and reported what he saw, with the honesty of someone who had nothing to gain from lying. His humor was dry. His observations were sharp. He documented weather patterns and tidal anomalies and the slow deterioration of masonry with the same quiet attention he gave to the color of a sunset or the behavior of a gannet diving for fish. A good keeper. A good man. I liked him. Sitting in his quarters, in his chair, listening to his voice come out of a 40-year-old machine, I felt like I was sitting across from him, like he was telling me his story over coffee, which made what came next so much worse. I put in the tape labeled 1981, September. The voice that came out was still Bellamy's, but it was different, tighter. The pauses between sentences were longer, as if he were choosing his words more carefully. Or as if he were looking at something while he spoke and couldn't quite describe what he saw.
September 3rd, 1981. Something in the water tonight. Southwest of the island, approximately 1 mile. A disturbance. Large surface displacement. Circular, maybe 100 feet across. Not whale behavior. I know whale behavior. This was different. The surface rose, smoothly, evenly, like something underneath was pushing up. Lasted about 3 minutes and then sank back. No repeat. Unusual. September 19th. It's back. Same location. Larger this time. I'd estimate 200 feet. It surfaced twice while I was watching. Both times the beam was on it. I have the impression, and I know how this sounds, I have the impression that it rises into the light, that the light is what brings it up. October 2nd.
His voice was quieter on this one, more deliberate. The voice of a man who has started taking his own observations very seriously.
Turned off the light at 100 as a test. Wanted to see if the disturbance appeared without the beam. It appeared at 108. Rose, held, sank. Rose again at 115. Again at 121. Each time larger. Each time holding longer. As if it was looking for the light. As if it was looking for me.
A pause. A long one. I could hear him breathing. Then,
turned the light back on at 0130. The disturbance stopped. It sank and did not return. I don't think it's looking for the light. I think the light is what keeps it down there. I think the light pins it, the way a flashlight pins an animal. It freezes. When the light is on, it watches. When the light is off, it moves.
The handwriting on the staircase walls, the carvings in the brass. They were Bellamy's, but the tapes were the real record. The tapes had his voice, his breathing, his pauses, his fear. The carved words were what he left for permanence. Stone outlasts tape, outlasts paper, outlasts everything. But the tapes were the man himself, alive in magnetic oxide, still talking to whoever would listen. I kept playing.
November 11th, 1981. It's bigger. I'm certain now.
His voice had a new quality. Not panic, not yet, but the rigid calm of a man holding himself together through discipline.
Each time it surfaces, it's larger than the last, growing, or more of it is rising. The dome is not its body. The dome is the top of something, the part closest to the surface. I don't know how deep it extends. January 6th, 1982. Calm seas, moonless night.
He was whispering now. Not for secrecy, there was no one to hide from. He was whispering because the thing he was describing demanded it.
Turned off the light at midnight. Went to the lantern room with binoculars. The disturbance appeared within 2 minutes. I couldn't see the dome in the dark, but I could see its effect on the water, the way the surface bent around it, the way the reflected starlight warped, and I could feel it. A vibration. In the stone beneath my feet, in the walls, in the glass. Not a sound, a frequency, lower than hearing. I felt it in my teeth and in my chest, and in a place behind my eyes that isn't a physical place. I turned the light on. The vibration stopped. The dome held at the surface. It didn't go back down, as if it was learning that the light wouldn't hurt it. March 15th. I haven't left the island in 4 months.
His voice was hoarse, tired. The voice of a man who doesn't sleep enough and knows it and can't fix it.
I haven't left the island in. The supply boat comes, but I don't go with it. I can't. The light needs to stay on. If I leave and the light goes off, it will surface fully. I don't know what fully means. I don't want to know. But the dome is 300 feet across now, and I can see texture on it when the beam passes over. Not smooth, not stone, not metal. Something organic, something with pores, something that breathes. June 22nd. Coast Guard inspection today.
He sounded almost angry on this one, frustrated. The anger of a man who knows something terrible and can't make anyone else see it.
I showed Lieutenant Hammond the disturbance. He saw nothing. The dome was there. I could see it clearly in the beam. He looked at the same water and saw flat ocean. He asked if I was feeling all right. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to be relieved. I said no. He left. He didn't see it. Nobody sees it. Only me. Only the light.
I was sitting in the dark now. The sun had set while I was listening. The keeper's quarters were black except for the glow of my flashlight lying on the desk, pointed at the ceiling, throwing a cone of weak yellow light that made the room feel like a cave. Bellamy's voice came out of the recorder and filled the darkness, and I was afraid in a way I hadn't been afraid since I was a child. Not of the dark, not of the isolation. Afraid of what was coming next on the tape, because I could hear it in his voice. The progression, the erosion, the slow collapse of a rational man under the weight of something irrational. I pressed play on 1982, September.
September 1st.
His voice was flat, defeated. the voice of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he wishes he hadn't.
I understand now. The light doesn't pin it. The light feeds it. Every photon that hits its surface is absorbed. Every night I keep the light on, it gets bigger. I've been feeding it for 11 years. I am the reason it's as large as it is.
A long silence. I could hear the ocean through the recording. The same ocean I could hear through the walls right now.
But if I turn the light off, it rises. If I turn it off long enough, it will surface completely. So I have to keep feeding it, because the alternative is seeing all of it. And I don't think a human mind can see all of it.
The carved words on the staircase, the scratches in the brass of the lens housing, the tapes. He'd been screaming into every medium he could find. His voice on magnetic tape, his warnings in stone, his desperation in metal. Each one a message in a bottle, thrown into the future, hoping someone would find it before they made the same mistakes he did. And here I was, sitting in his chair, in his quarters, having already wired a generator to the Fresnel lens 40 feet above me, having already read the work order that said I needed to test the light, having found his warnings hours too late in the wrong order after the sun was already down. I put in the last tape. 1983, November. My hands were shaking. The cassette rattled against the housing as I pushed it in. Bellamy's voice came through barely above a whisper. The hoarseness was gone, replaced by something worse. A clarity. The terrible, luminous clarity of a man who has stopped being afraid because he has passed through fear and come out the other side into understanding.
November 8th. I turned the light off last night. I had to know.
His breathing was slow and controlled, the breathing of someone managing a panic attack through sheer will.
I sat in the dark lantern room and watched the ocean, and within 90 seconds the dome began to rise, higher than before, 10 feet, 20. Water cascading off the surface, the sound of it reaching me from a mile away. A roar, like a waterfall, like a river being born.
He paused. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to almost nothing.
And then it stopped. The dome held at maybe 30 feet above the waterline, and I could see the curve of it, the sheer mass, blocking out the stars along the horizon. And at the apex, at the very top, something opened.
Silence on the tape. 5 seconds. 10. I could hear the wind in the recording, the faint creak of the tower.
An aperture, a gap, a space that was darker than the dark around it, darker than the ocean, darker than the sky, a darkness that had depth, that went inward, that continued down into the body of the thing for a distance that felt infinite.
His voice cracked, not with fear, with awe.
And from inside that aperture, something looked at me, not with eyes, with attention, with a focus so vast and so precise that I felt it on my skin like heat. It read me. In the time it took my heart to beat once, it knew everything about me. Every memory, every fear, every thought I'd ever had, and every thought I would ever have.
He was crying. I could hear it. A man crying and trying not to, on a rock in the Atlantic in 1983, talking into a recorder that nobody would hear for 40 years.
It was the most intimate thing I have ever felt, and it was unbearable. Addendum. Same night.
His voice was steadier now, emptied.
I know 2 things. First, the light is a leash. It keeps the thing at 1 mile. If the light goes off, it comes closer. If the light stays off long enough, it will come all the way here. Second, it's not the only one.
The tape hissed, static. Then the final recording, the one the Coast Guard had found, the one that should have been in my briefing, the one nobody at the commission had ever played for me.
I turned the light off. It follows the beam. Every pass it gets closer. It knows where I am. I can hear it moving when the light touches the water. God, it sees me. It sees me.
The tape ran out. The recorder clicked off. The keeper's quarters were completely silent except for the ocean outside, moving against the rocks in a rhythm that sounded now exactly like breathing. The light had been off for 40 years. 40 years without the leash. 40 years for it to move, to grow, to drift closer, to do whatever it does in the spaces where light can't reach. I didn't want to go back to the lantern room. Every instinct told me to get in the skiff and motor to Jonesport and call Diane and tell her the lighthouse was structurally unsound and should be demolished. But I had to know how close it had gotten. I climbed the stairs, past Bellamy's carved warnings, "The light brings it up," past the dark substance seeping through the mortar, more active now, fresh and glistening, running in thin rivulets that smelled like the inside of something living. Past the second warning, "Don't turn it on at night," which I was about to ignore because the not knowing was worse than anything the light could show me. His voice was still in my head, the sound of a man crying on a tape nobody had listened to for 4 decades. I reached the lantern room. The generator was still connected, its low rattle filling the glass enclosure. The Fresnel lens waited in the dark, its prisms catching the faint beam of my flashlight and breaking it into tiny rainbows that scattered across the walls like something alive. I walked to the seaward glass and looked out. The ocean was black, featureless. The overcast sky gave no moonlight, no starlight. I could see nothing beyond the granite shelf at the base of the tower. The water could have been 10 feet deep or 10,000, empty or full. I stood at the switch. My finger touched the toggle. The metal was warm. Bellamy's voice in my head. "Don't turn it on at night." I flipped it. The Fresnel lens erupted. The beam lanced out through the glass, a corridor of white light cutting across the ocean, illuminating the surface in a strip that extended to the horizon. The water in the beam's path turned from black to vivid green, that eerie underwater green you see in shallow tropical water. But this was the North Atlantic in October, 50-degree water, hundreds of feet deep. There was no reason for the water to look like that. The disturbance was not 1 mile away. It was 200 feet from the island. The dome rose from the ocean's surface like a hill emerging from fog. It was so close that I could see everything Bellamy had described on the tapes, everything he'd tried to put into words while his voice shook and his hands trembled and the recorder captured every crack and breath and silence. The surface was not stone or metal or skin. It was something between all three. A grey-black material covered in ridges and channels that pulsed with a slow tidal rhythm, contracting and expanding with a motion that was unmistakably biological. The channels between the ridges were filled with a luminous fluid that glowed faintly blue-green. Bioluminescence arranged in patterns. Lines, curves, shapes that repeated in sequences that suggested language or mathematics, or something so far beyond both that the comparison was meaningless. The dome extended beyond the beam on both sides. I couldn't see its edges. At 200 feet from the island, the visible portion was 500 feet across. But that was only what the light touched. The rest curved away into darkness, suggesting a circumference I couldn't calculate and didn't want to. And at the apex, directly in line with the beam, close enough that I could have hit it with a thrown stone, the aperture was open. Not opening, already open. Waiting. As if it had been waiting for 40 years. It was 30 feet across, a dark circle in the surface of the dome, its edges smooth and glistening. The beam of the Fresnel lens, the most powerful light I had ever stood behind, entered it and did not come out. The light went in and was consumed, absorbed, eaten. And from inside it, from the depthless dark within the body of something larger than the island I stood on, I felt the attention. Bellamy had described it precisely. His voice hadn't been enough. Words weren't enough. But he'd tried. It was not sight, not observation. It was reading. The thing was reading me the way the beam read the surface of the ocean. Systematically, completely, without effort. I felt it move through my thoughts like a hand through a file drawer. My childhood, my career, my failed relationships, the name of my first dog, the last thing my mother said to me before I left for this job. Every memory, every sensation, every thought I'd ever had, opened and examined and catalogued in the space of a single heartbeat. And something came back. Not words, not images. A feeling. Pressed directly into my consciousness. Gratitude. It was grateful for the light, for 40 years of darkness that had allowed it to drift closer. The most of all, for me, for standing in the lantern room and choosing to look. Because the light wasn't a leash. Bellamy had been wrong. The light was a signal, a beacon. Not for ships, for them. Every lighthouse on every coast, every beam sweeping across dark water was a signal that said, "We are here. We are small. We are on the shore. We make light because we are afraid of the dark." Every lighthouse humanity ever built was a confession of vulnerability, broadcast to whatever was listening from below. The gratitude deepened, became anticipation. The feeling a traveler has when they see the lights of home. The aperture widened. From within the depthless interior, something emerged. Not a body, a sound, a frequency below hearing, in my bones, my teeth, the fluid of my inner ears. A vibration that was also a word that was also a name. My name. Not Garrett, my real name. The name that describes what I actually am, a collection of electrical impulses in a calcium shell, standing on a rock in an ocean, making light. The thing said that name, and I understood it, and the understanding was the most horrifying thing I have ever experienced. I turned off the light. The beam died. Everything went dark. And from the darkness, 200 feet away, the dome began to rise. I ran. Down the stairs, past Bellamy's carved warnings that I'd finally understood too late, past the substance flowing freely down the walls, warm under my boots. Through the keeper's quarters, past his desk, past the recorder with its stack of tapes, past the voice of a man who tried to warn me through every medium he had, his voice on tape, his words in stone, his desperation scratched into brass. And nobody at the commission had bothered to listen before sending me out here alone. The skiff was where I'd left it. The outboard started on the second pull. I cast off and throttled into the darkness, aiming for the distant lights of Jonesport. I didn't look back, but I could hear it. The roaring waterfall sound of an ocean being displaced by something surfacing from below. I could feel the wake, a massive swell that lifted the skiff and pushed it forward, the ocean itself trying to put distance between me and what was behind me. I reached Jonesport in 14 minutes. The crossing should have taken 35. The swell carried me. A wave that didn't break, didn't dissipate. A wall of displaced water rolling toward shore with the momentum of something enormous rising in its wake. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been back. The work order sits on my desk, incomplete, that I've been watching the news. Shipping lanes off the northeastern coast rerouted 3 times. Unusual current patterns. 2 fishing trawlers losing their nets to submerged obstructions in water charted at over 400 feet deep. A NOAA buoy recording an 11-degree temperature spike 60 miles south of Jonesport. And 2 days ago, a lobsterman named Arthur Voss reported that the ocean around his boat had turned a vivid, luminous green, lit from below, pulsing, like breathing. It's on the surface now, not a mile out, not 200 feet. On the surface, visible from 5 miles away. It's not hiding anymore. I need to go back. I know I need to go back and turn the Fresnel lens on and hope the light still works as a leash. That 1 mile is enough, but I don't think it will. Because the thing Bellamy understood, the thing he carved into the walls and scratched into the brass and recorded on tape after tape in a voice that went from steady to broken over 12 years, was the last thing he said before the final recording. It's not the only one. Every decommissioned lighthouse, every dark tower on every coast, every beam that was turned off and never turned back on, every leash we took off. I checked the Commission's database. 287 decommissioned lighthouses on the northeastern seaboard alone. 287 lights that went dark between 1970 and 2000. 287 leashes, all removed. And the ocean is very, very large. And it is very, very dark. And something in it is drifting toward shore.